Let's talk supply chain. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Let's Talk Supply Chain. Before we get on with the show, I have a question for you. Talent shortages continue to be a problem for many organizations. So, according to research from BSI, what percentage of women globally feel that greater flexibility would help them remain in the workplace longer? I definitely hear about more demand for hybrid or remote working. And I know there's an increase in self-employed people. So I feel like this could be a pretty high number. Well, what do you think? Let me know your guesses over on social and keep listening because all will be revealed at the end of the show. So today I'm excited to welcome an industry rising star to our Woman in Supply Chain series. She's passionate about supply chain sustainability, and that is Kimberly Rodriguez. Now, after pursuing an international education, Kimberly entered supply chain not knowing what to expect. Now, over 7 years later, she's developing and executing sustainable supply chain services for companies across multiple industries and regions with a focus on business and human rights. So today, Kimberly will be talking all about her career journey, tackling the industry's biggest sustainability challenges, overcoming imposter syndrome, and finding her place in male-dominated spaces. Now, of course, we could not have this series without our sponsor. So Food Logistics and Supply and Demand Chain Executives Woman in Supply Chain Award and Forum honors female supply chain leaders and executives whose accomplishments, mentorship, and examples set a foundation for women in all levels of a company's supply chain network. If you haven't checked them out, Google Woman in Supply Chain Forum and Awards to go and see what that's all about. So welcome to the show, Kimberly.
Hey Sarah, thank you so much for having me. Really pleasure to be here today.
I am so excited to have you here. Now, I've been interviewing lots of Women in Supply Chain Award winners, and it's been a journey. I'm speaking to women of different ages, experience levels, cultures, industry sectors, and it's been absolutely so much fun and fascinating. And I'm really looking forward to your journey and what you're going to be talking to us today about. So I think you grew up in the Philippines, but I read you then went to university in Abu Dhabi before moving to New York, where you are today. I mean, that's amazing. Can you tell us about the early years of maybe your career or even starting with university and before that?
Yeah, definitely. So yes, you are correct. I was born and raised in the Philippines. Born and bred Filipino, and I know my family is still there. I was very fortunate to have really great educational opportunities at an early age. When I was, about 12, 13, I received a scholarship to attend an international school in the Philippines,
Wow.
which really opened up a lot of doors for me because, before I was 12 or 13, I really didn't know what the world looked like. For example, I could see my classmates during Europe, on a piece of paper, and I was like, I don't have no idea what that looks like. Beyond the Philippines, I just didn't know what the world was, and this opportunity really opened so many doors for me. And after that, I received another scholarship to go to NYU in Abu Dhabi. I think the
Oh.
school had just opened when I started, and so they were really looking for students across the world, sponsoring them to come to the UAE and study at NYU's new campus. And I think that experience open even further doors for me. And I think that's really where I think I was exposed to supply chain, and that's where my career in this space really began. I think I can speak a little bit to that journey that when I was in Abu Dhabi, as a Filipino, there were a lot of Filipinos in Abu Dhabi, and I could see that, it's a very growing, a society that's growing and developing. And, 50 years ago, the UAE, there was sand and there was indigenous populations, but there was
Right.
really nothing like what you see today. And so it's a society that has developed and grown very, very fast. And a lot of that is through the work of a lot of migrant workers who go and work in the UAE. And while I was at NYU, I led the student humanitarian organization where we would, volunteer with migrant workers, kind of like looking at various like labor camps, looking at understanding how they fit into the UAE society. And I think that's really kind of where I began to understand like there's the complex supply chains and
Yeah.
people are very much a part of it. And that's really kind of where I entered the space.
So let's talk a little bit about that because when I was doing research for this particular episode, your education, I believe, focused largely on political science and business.
Yes.
So, how did you get into supply chain? Like, I understand sort of the correlation between some of those things and
Yeah.
some of the things in supply chain,
Yeah.
but like, how did you fit that puzzle together and get excited about supply chain?
Yeah, I think it stems really from that experience, understanding that workers were such a big part of a complex problem. I
Hmm.
think, as some background, there's various human rights issues, all over the world, and I think in the UAE construction industry, there were concerns that were raised based on the
Okay.
treatment of how workers were on like in these different large projects. And so I was curious about it, and I think you understand that here's an institution, here's the worker, and there's a lot of middlemen in between. So I
Hmm.
think just understanding these complex relationships between subcontractors, agencies, supply chain is really not just products or processes, but it's really people. So I think, while I was focused on, political science, history, and then eventually I went to business school at NYU in New York. I think that was always in the back of my mind. And actually, when I went to business school, I decided to go to Stern. One of the primary reasons I chose to go to NYU Stern was that they had started a Center for Business and Human Rights. It was
Okay.
the first center for business and human rights in a business school. Like usually, the Human Rights Center would be in the law school or kind of like the nonprofit school, but this was the first one in like nestled in the business school. So I think when I was pursuing my MBA, I did have a focus on, all right, like I'm not just doing this for just MBA in general, but I did want to focus on understanding the complexities of supply chain
Yeah.
basically,
Yeah.
because I realized
Well,
it's a much bigger world.
yeah. Well, and I think that that's interesting. I mean, recently on my live show, Thoughts and Coffee, we had, I believe it was the CEO of the Anti-Slavery Collective
Hmm.
out of the UK talking about how they are now focusing on supply chains because it's a big part of not only human rights, but
Yeah,
obviously slavery and what's going on in human trafficking around the world and things like that actually play a large role in that
yeah,
and could play a large role in that. And so we have to draw attention to these correlations and how things are really relative to each other and what the importance of the impact of the role that we play, even if we're sitting at a desk every single day.
yeah, exactly. Definitely agree on that.
You've said that when you first started on this career path, you didn't really know what to expect. Did you have any knowledge at all of supply chain, or did you kind of go in completely blind? And what do you think of the industry now, like 7 years later?
Definitely went in completely blind. I mean, I was just like, this is something interesting for me, and I can see that it's obviously such a wide impact. And I think even after the pandemic, supply chain became the biggest buzzword. And it's like, oh, like I guess now everyone is curious about what it is or like how it's impactful. And it's always so surprising to me that, the more I'm in the space, the more I realize how supply chains make everything we do. That's how everything works. And everything is interlinked. There's really nothing that can't be done without like consideration of like all the different like entities that make up
Mhm.
like any even a small business's supply chain, and it blows my mind sometimes that it's not talked about more.
Right.
But no, I remember I think earlier on, I think my first year in the role, I think BSI sent me to like a conference, and then for some reason they trusted me enough to like speak in front of an audience about like some of the work that we do, and I was on stage with like these three other like older males who'd been in the industry for like 30 years,
Mhm.
and they were like, "Oh yeah, I've been in the company for like 1 year," and then I just felt, I mean, it was just very funny to think back on, that I'm very honored that BSI, trusted me enough to go on stage, but also like, wow, like do I really know what I'm talking about? But
Of course
um,
you do. We as
uh,
women have got to stop doing that, right? We don't give ourselves enough credit.
I guess, yeah, I guess not. But yeah, I think it's such a complex and fascinating industry, and I'm glad to see it getting more coverage or attention since the pandemic. But
Yeah.
I'm just so surprised that it took the pandemic for people to recognize the supply chain as
I
an
know.
important role, I guess.
Well, and one of the things that I'll say here and now is there are a lot of people around the world that work in supply chain that don't realize they work in
Yes.
supply chain,
Yeah, yeah, that is so
right?
true. Yeah.
I think you've got finance people out there
Yeah.
who are like supply chain what? But
Yeah.
everything that they do, or at least what they do on a day-to-day basis, touches supply chain in one way or another, because finance is a huge component
Yeah,
of
100%.
moving goods around the world and supply chain and all that kind of stuff. And so it's fascinating to me when I talk to people about their roles and what they're doing within their companies. And I'm like, I think you might have maybe an adjacent role to supply chain, and you might want to really take a look at supply chain and learning a little bit more about it and how you play a role in the impact of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fascinating to me. Now, fast forward to today. You're currently manager of supply chain sustainability at BSI. Can you give us just a quick overview of what BSI does, but also tell us a little bit about your role there? What does it mean? What are you doing? What does your day-to-day kind of look like?
Definitely. So BSI, the British Standards Institution, is the national standards body of the UK. So if you heard about ISO standards, British
Yes.
standards, that's all, BSI is involved in the creation, development of these standards. So I think globally we're known for standards development,
Okay.
implementation, certification, but I actually work in the sustainability consulting team. So I'm in an advisory role, and my day-to-day, well, it changes day-to-day really depending on what the client's needs are. But essentially, I help our clients manage their sustainability risks along their supply chain. And that's focused on human rights risks, social and labor compliance, and also increasingly a lot of environmental risks. My other team members are, they have PhDs in climate science and greenhouse gas accounting, life cycle analysis. So I support some of the environmental due diligence projects as well.
Hmm.
And increasingly, we've found that we've been helping clients just navigate the alphabet soup of regulatory requirements. Like, every other day
I
there's a new
love that.
acronym and everyone's just confused and everyone's like, all right, like it's the same kind of four letters, but then there's like a little bit of a difference and they're all asking, similar things, but in different ways. So I think over the last 2 years, especially, a lot of my day to day has also been keeping up to date with what's happening and kind of narrowing it down for the clients we're working with. Because in sustainability, I think we end up working with people who truly want to make a difference. And I promise I'm not drinking like the corporate Kool-Aid of like, yes, we all want to make an impact, but I think genuinely the individuals you work with, whether they're clients or people within my company who are not necessarily in sustainability, like everyone has good intentions and do want to make an impact. And yeah, I think just seeing how these all work together it's a big part of my role.
Well, I love hearing that you're like bringing sort of sustainability down to earth with your alphabet soup
Yeah.
comment. I mean, in supply chain, we have way more acronyms than
Yeah,
any of
I'm
us
sure.
need. And
Yeah.
I can only imagine how big of a job that is to keep on top of all of the rules and
Yeah.
regulations and
It's a
everything
lot.
coming in for the client.
Yeah.
And I know when talking to, chief supply chain officers, business owners, that kind of thing, sustainability, they feel like they want it to be important,
Yeah.
but it's very overwhelming for
Yeah.
a lot of people, especially when there's so many other things that they need to be thinking about. Before we get into their biggest challenges and what they're focused on, I just want to ask you, like, is this something that you're seeing an uptick in, or is this something that, like, are they still hesitant about? Sustainability and bringing that in and the work behind it and the investment and all that kind of stuff.
I think there's definitely an uptick. I think, even in the last 7 years that I've seen a huge change actually in just sustainability, this is even sustainability moving from department. Like,
Yeah.
maybe 7 years ago to be talking to someone in marketing or, which is, I
Okay.
think if you're talking to someone in marketing with sustainability, you kind of can understand what they're looking, what
The
the end
temperament.
product would be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Whereas now we're talking to people like the chief procurement officer or like chief finance officer. And I think
Okay.
it's increasing in like the level of, what do you call it? Like the
Importance.
high, and not in, like, marketing is important, but like, I guess like,
I know marketing is
like
important. I mean,
how central it is to like a company's strategy. Like I
okay.
think like more higher up you go, I guess, in the corporate ladder or however you want to
That's
call it,
true.
it seems like the more resources it's
Priority.
given.
Yeah.
Definitely an uptick. I think it's a bit frustrating too with the regulations because even though the regulations have increased and now I think it's a great lever I think regulations are a great lever to push for action and
Yeah.
push for investment. With sustainability, the regulations keep changing. And I think that is very frustrating because a company might have budgeted, this amount of money to invest in like a sustainability initiative, but then if that regulation changes or is scaled back, people lose patience
They
and,
do.
might just like lose trust in institutions, I guess. So
But
I
also,
think it's
they might
frustrating.
lose money, right? They
Yeah,
they
exactly.
might
Yeah.
have invested in the path one way.
Yeah.
And then things get changed and they have to invest more in another way. And
Yeah,
you're going to lose
exactly.
people if that's the case and that's what happens. But I'm really happy to hear that you're talking to chief procurement officers. A friend of the show, Frances Edmonds, she's head of sustainability at HP Canada. She always talks about how sustainability needs to start with procurement.
Yes. Yes.
Right. And so
Yeah.
I think that is really seeping into the industry, especially if you're talking to chief procurement officers. So
Yeah.
I really, really, really like to hear that. So let's talk about what they're focusing on. Like, what would you say to organizations looking to actually, no, before that, we often talk about sustainability on the show. And so I want to know because we don't usually have specialists on the subject all the time. So, talk to us from your perspective, like sustainability in supply chain. What are the biggest goals clients are focusing on? What are their biggest challenges?
Yeah, I think the biggest goals are really just mapping your supply chain. And I know this is said all the time,
Hmm.
especially in like sustainability circles. Like we need to map our supply chain, understand where we're coming from. And it's easy to say, but it's very hard to do. I think especially for global corporations with multiple tier two, tier three suppliers, and especially if they're in, countries that are not very that do not have strong or very stringent regulations. I think one of the biggest challenges is understanding not just where things are coming from, but like what are their relationships like? I think a lot of like global corporations now have a good understanding and relationship with their direct suppliers, so they're first tier down. But going beyond, I don't think in the last 7 years, and I think I've asked my colleagues as well who've been here for like 20, 30 years. I don't think we have worked with a client who has good relationships with even tier two suppliers. Like there's
Wow.
some now that have okay, have an understanding generally of where they are, but if they wanted, for example, a tier two supplier to change something, like it's so
Right.
complicated because it depends how much they're providing for you, what kind of
Yeah.
requirements they're also receiving from other clients. And I think with sustainability especially, there's like a need and a goal to consolidate more or like work together with your competitors and industry players. And I think or other industry players. And I feel that there is a desire for companies to be like, hey, we're all working with the same suppliers. Like,
Yeah.
let's not bombard them with like five of basically the same questionnaire.
I love to
But
hear
I think
that.
that's a challenge of, yeah. I
No,
think,
but like
yeah.
I'm glad that you brought that up because I haven't actually really talked about this before
Yeah.
on any of my episodes, even about sustainability. We talk about collaboration all the time. We talk about
Yeah.
collaboration internally, we talk about collaboration externally. But it's interesting that you bring that up in the fact that if we're all working with one
Yeah. Same
supplier,
supplier.
why are we going to pull them into a variety of different directions when we
Yeah.
all really need to come towards the same goal? Why can't we just put all of that together and figure out which one are the priorities for all of us so that we
Yeah.
can get to the point of where we want to get to, whatever that goal is, whatever that KPI is? I
Yeah.
love to hear that. That is an awesome suggestion.
Yeah, and BSI has done it with security audits. Some we have an industry initiative called Scan, and it's brings a lot of different clients together, and they actually share their security audits with certain suppliers
Hmm.
because they know I'm not the best person to speak on it. I don't work so much on the
All
security
good.
side, but I do know that, for example, CTPAT is like
Yes.
it's a very big regulation in supply chains, obviously, and I think it necessary certification for a lot of suppliers, and I think so many clients are like we're all kind of realize, at least in the security space, we're working with the same ones. Why don't we just share the information that we're getting, at least on the
Mhm.
CTPAT side? You don't need to share proprietary information or like all of these things. But we actually have like BSI managers, like the SCAN program, with that like just shares this information, and everyone seems to be getting along, and it's working really
Wow.
well. So I'm like, why can't we do it? Or I guess we're thinking of ways to do it in sustainability. And when we talk to clients,
Yeah.
everyone's very, I think, open to do it. I think they're just waiting for maybe someone to make the big move. But I mean, they're all asking the same questions like, okay, show these statements. What are your emissions? What are your policies? It's the same, I
Mm.
think, like information we all want to know. And the more information is shared, at least the easier it is to target, either
Well,
sustainable, ethical
I
supply.
mean, think about being that supplier. And
Yeah.
let's say you're
Also,
asked
yeah.
from like 10 to 15
Yeah, exactly.
customers
Audit
for
fatigue. Yeah.
the exact same questions, maybe the exact same audits, and
Yeah.
you have to do it 10 to 15 times,
Yeah.
like say it differently. I mean, who wants
Exactly.
to do we're that's can be very manual depending on how
Yeah.
large that supplier is, right?
Yeah.
We all want to automate it. We all want to get that information quickly. We all want to get those audits over with.
Yeah,
So how do
yeah,
we make it easier on that supplier without, pushing them necessarily for investment or
yeah,
discounts or things like that? This is another way of really coming together and showing that partnership initiative. I love this one. Thank you
yeah.
for sharing that. That
Of course.
that is really, really cool. So I know you just gave us a really, really good one, but what would you say to organizations looking to focus more strategically on sustainability in 2025? Like, do you have some other practical tips about where they should potentially start? Because it's a beast, right? It
Yeah,
runs the gamut across the business.
yeah,
Supply chain's only one piece of an organization. And a lot of times there's bandwidth issues, right? Because we're dealing with disruptions on a daily basis.
yeah,
We're talking about how do we manage our supply chains and what do we want that to look like? Do we want it to
yeah.
be an international journey? Do we want to bring it more closer to home? Even DCs, do we want them closer to the consumer? Are we using stores? Like, there's a lot to think about in supply chain. So, if you have any practical tips of where they should start, I would love to hear it.
I think yeah, mapping supply chain obviously is kind of just it's a huge, but I think even understanding how different internal functions work together, because we're also finding it with a lot of our clients, and just get to give sustainability as an example. So many different functions own it, and I think it's good. It's a good thing because sustainability shouldn't be just one person's job or one team's job. It should be
Could you imagine?
incorporated. Yeah, I know exactly, and,
Every
and
job.
see that in a lot. Like, oh, the sustainability person is this person, but like, no, like if you're in finance, you're also, it's part of it too. Like, I think we're
Mhm.
all really need to be working together, but just like understanding in with other functions, like who's responsible for what, and really understanding where the data lies within your company, whether that be like the emissions data, the waste data, the human rights kind of KPIs or whatever it is that defines your sustainability or supply chain strategy. Because we're seeing that there's a lot of many companies than we would like to admit, I think, work in silos sometimes, and
Mhm.
I think a lot of the information is there. It's just either like tribal knowledge where it's with one person, it's not documented. But I think even just doing an internal assessment of like who's responsible for what our resources and what our targets are, in terms of like what should be our supply chain strategy for next year,
Mhm.
whatever that looks like. I think is a good start as well because sometimes it's usually like the idea of one person or like one team, and without buy-in from like, because with supply chain, it cannot just be with one team. Like you need to get
Right.
buy-in from like compliance, from legal, from all these things, and you need to all be aligned internally first before
Yeah.
kind of I think like jumping off into a big like strategic project.
Yeah, well, and it's not really just about buy-in, right? It's
Yeah,
also if you've got one person that's in charge of sustainability, let's say, sustainability touches all aspects of the organization. If they only have a background in supply chain,
yeah,
they won't really necessarily understand how it affects the other parts of the organization or how to create maybe innovative ways for those different parts of the organization to become sustainable, right? You
yeah,
need the background in all areas, and not everybody is going to have that. I mean, you're not going to be able to find that everywhere. And that's really going to make a difference. And plus, you don't want that bias to creep in on a sustainability plan either.
yeah,
They heavily focused in supply chain, they have a supply chain background. They're going to focus on what they know.
yeah,
And what really needs to happen is you got to focus on a organization as a whole. So I think that it's not necessarily just about mapping supply
yeah,
chain. It's also about who in the organization needs to come together on a regular basis to have these discussions and figure
yeah,
out what really needs to happen and how we can make different initiatives a priority.
yeah, definitely agree.
Yeah. So as a woman, like what has your experience been in supply chain? You're fairly young, so you've entered an industry that looks very different to when
Yes.
I began. But unfortunately, it's still not necessarily that equal playing field for women or even underrepresented voices. What's your take on that? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think as an example I mentioned earlier when I was on stage with like three, I think seasoned,
Mhm.
like, older men who kind of were like, oh, like what you doing this age? I think that was the beginning of like, oh, okay, like this is not, like, this is not what my friends are doing.
Right.
So I think it's I mean, I feel like I also entered at a time when there are a bit more women in
Hmm.
supply chain. I think that like at BSI, I had some women mentors and I mean, mostly male still, but I think in sustainability specifically, there does tend to be more women. I think that that has been encouraging. But definitely, when we go to these conferences and we have conversations with chief procurement officers, it's mostly male. And there's a lot of imposter syndrome for sure. Because I think when you're like,
Yeah.
oh, you're talking to someone in supply chain, you think of someone like in a factory, like walking the floor. And I've done audits on factory floors, like globally as well. And I think when I come in, like they just look at me and they're like, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing here? And I mean, I think I get taken seriously like maybe halfway through the audit, but like I think in the beginning, it's really hard to
Mm.
make your presence, I think, known, just because the first impression, especially when you're coming from like positions like auditing, it's really important to set the tone. And I think when they see, I think, a small Asian woman, it's always like, oh, okay, like she's not a threat, and then you can show, I think, later on like what you can do. So that's kind of a long-winded answer, but I think just to say that it's definitely not been the easiest. I think from a recently, like I don't feel, well, I don't know.
No, no, it's and I'm so glad that you shared that example, and I'm so glad that we're here in this part of the conversation. I am very much focused on sort of my relationship and talking
Yeah,
about my relationship with self-worth,
yeah,
imposter syndrome. And I think, it's really easy to say I'm over imposter syndrome. I don't get any self-doubt, but I don't think that's the reality for
no, yeah,
everybody. It's certainly not the reality for me. And also, imposter syndrome, we have to remember, right? Like it happens for women, but it also happens for men. I was
yeah.
at a conference last year, and I had just recently written a post about self-worth. And he sat down next to me at lunch, and he turned to me and he was like, "Oh, I just read your post about self-worth." He's like, "It's the reason why I showed up today at this conference." He's
Wow,
like, "I didn't feel like I belonged here, and I have a really hard time talking to people.
wow,
But when I saw your post, I just want to say thank you for writing that because it really encouraged me to be like, no, you know what? I'm going to get over my imposter syndrome today. I'm going to get over my self-doubt. And, I'm worth getting up and going into the conference today to see who I can meet. And here you are. I met you today."
yeah,
And
yeah. That's
so,
great.
I think it's really important that we share some of these examples and talk about how, like, we have potentially self-doubt on a regular basis. I know
Yeah,
I do. And there's
yeah.
no shame in that. I think a lot of times we sit in our shame, and that's not good for anybody either. So I guess my question to you, just the last question on that little piece, how do you rise above that self-doubt and sort of find your power? Like you walk into that factory floor, and or you feel like what everybody's thinking, because sometimes
Yeah,
we tell ourselves stories, right? And so, you utilize what you know and who you are, and you don't change any of that, and you go through it. And at some point, you see things changing. But
yeah.
how do you work through that to get to that point from your own standpoint?
Yeah, I think from my own standpoint, like I know that I am today because a lot of people have supported me, whether it be in schools or at BSI. BSI is the first company I've worked for, and I think I really had great mentors who believed in me. And I think, it matters a lot like who champions you and who pushes you
Mm,
forward. I mean, just a mere fact that again, in like that year one, like I've spoken at conference, it's like, okay, these people actually believe in me or like and think I can
yeah.
represent not only the company but like the industry and the work that we do. And I think I just try to remember that before I go into, I mean, they're sending me as an auditor, when I do an audit, like they're sending me for a reason. They've seen my work. They've seen the way, I've shadowed audits before, so like they've seen how can interview people and like do document reviews. So if they trust me enough to send me across the world on my own to like do this, then there must be something,
Yeah.
to do. And I get nervous obviously beforehand, but I think, I just put on a nice blazer or like, I think like what you wear
The
can really help
power suit.
sometimes as well, yeah. And then I think like after we get through kind of like an opening meeting or opening conversation, again, whether it be a client or a factory, like I think
Mhm.
I just remember like I am here because people believe in what I can do. And, I believe in my friends, I believe in my colleagues, and I don't think I don't doubt them. So if someone doesn't doubt
Mhm.
me, then there must be like a reason. So I just try
Yeah.
to remember that.
Well, and also I think reminding yourself, right, of what you have
Yeah.
accomplished
Yeah.
and that you have done this before and
Yeah.
there's a
Yeah, that's
reason
true.
that you've been sent on this particular project and
Yeah.
assigned to it and asked to do it, right?
Yeah.
And that kind of helps sometimes, I feel,
Yeah.
when that sort of self-doubt creeps in, right?
Yeah.
Well, I
I agree.
appreciate you for sharing that. I want to acknowledge and appreciate you for sharing that just because, this is what some of these conversations are all about. We need to resonate with each other and understand that if you're sitting in some self-doubt today, it's okay. We
Yeah.
all feel it. We all go through it. So I just want to appreciate you for sharing that. Now,
Thank
you
you.
were recently named an industry rising star at the Women in Supply Chain Awards. So congratulations.
Thank
As
you.
someone that entered the industry not really knowing what to expect, what does it mean to you a few years later to be honored by that same industry?
Yeah, it's just really such an honor. I still, even 7 years in, I still feel like a newbie. And I think to be recognized for the work that I've done in the last 7 years is very humbling. And, it just makes me realize, again, as you mentioned, like sometimes, and, supply chain is like the one of, I guess, a very old industry. Like, there's always been supply chains, even though it's never been named supply chain necessarily. I still feel like I'm learning so much every day, but I guess even like, getting the award and being able to talk about the work I've done makes me realize that I have done quite a bit. Like, I am getting more experience in the space and I can talk about it in a way that makes sense and I think a unique insight to yeah, people who ask about it. So it's definitely been such an honor. I think I
Mhm.
feel really like blessed to be able to
Mhm.
get this award and yeah, I really just hope that I can continue proving like these yeah, proving myself
Yeah.
right or like,
Yeah.
being able
Well,
to
and
show
you're
what
making
I
an
can do.
impact,
Yeah, making an
right?
impact.
You
Yes.
are making an impact on the industry, no matter what it is we're doing on a day-to-day basis. It could be a
Yeah.
small impact, a bigger impact. Some days it's bigger, some days it's smaller. But I think we also need to remind ourselves that we are making an impact and we're part of moving this industry forward. And I love
Yes.
that. So you've talked about mentors, sponsors. You've talked a little bit about how important it has been for your career, your personal growth. Who is that support network? Like, how did you find them? How have they helped you? What does all of that look like, that journey and mentors and sponsors and champions?
Yeah, I think from a young age, people have believed and seen potential in me, whether it be, I think I mentioned earlier the educational institutions that have supported me. So in Manila, my international school, then NYU in Abu Dhabi and NYU Stern, obviously. I think in each of those places, and especially at BSI, I've had, just like whether it be a professor, counselor, kind of like teachers or different adults that had, and I guess I'm an adult now too, but like players that I've worked with who like just pushed me to go ask questions and be and go beyond like what the norms are have
Hmm.
been they gave me a platform to talk to. I think when I was in Abu Dhabi when I was working with like migrant workers and human rights, I was very surprised. I was like in and I think when I had some questions, like they, NYU Abu Dhabi like brought the entire compliance team to talk to me. We talked to like the
Wow.
contractors they were working with. We talked to kind of different humanitarian groups, but like the fact that they would welcome me into the room with all these people who had been working in their jobs for like 30 years and I wasn't even working, I think really made me believe that what my ideas mattered. And at BSI, my manager Ryan Lynn, she's been like the biggest support really for the past like 7+ years through my career growth, through various immigration challenges that I know because I'm here at visa and I think he's been so
Right.
supportive. But even like internally where he has again like invited me into the room like or and like let me lead a discussion with like senior leaders in BSI or like people from other companies and just I had full trust that I can handle these conversations has
Mm.
really done a lot in my self confidence and
That's
my
wonderful. And
yeah
I'm glad that you shared who that is and what that's looked like because
yeah
too often sometimes we take it for granted and we don't necessarily share what that has meant to you. And I'm sure for them, it'll be really nice to hear about what that has meant for you and how they've made an impact in your career and your life and things like that. And I think we need to tell people more often. So, last question. What does the future hold for you?
the future I guess the future is so many years or could be next year as well because it's almost a new year yeah I then definitely I'm still in this space and I do see myself in this space in the long term I think we'll see with all the regulatory changes and I think I'm hoping that there's been a lot of climate catastrophes like globally. My home country, the Philippines, was very much affected by a lot of these climate changes. So I think
Mhm.
as much as I was on business and human rights, I do want to continue growing my technical abilities in climate and carbon reduction as well. So I think just continuing to grow in this space, working with different clients, working with more industry specialists like yourself. So yeah, I'm just looking forward to meeting more people as well and hopefully getting out of my home office more than than we have.
I love that. What a fabulous conversation. I mean, you've already experienced and achieved so much, and you're a real inspiration. And I can't wait to see where your career takes you next because I'm sure you have big and exciting things to come. So, did you all have a guess at today's big question? Well, at the top of the show, I asked you, according to research from BSI, what percentage of women globally feel that greater flexibility would help them remain in the workplace longer? Well, I said it would be big. It's a massive 76%. So, flexible working opportunities are crucial to inclusive workplaces. If you'd like to hear more from us at Let's Talk Supply Chain, we have plenty more content for you featuring the best and the brightest in the industry. Head over to letstalksupplychain.com or our YouTube channel to check out the latest. And remember to come back next week because I've got another one of those best and brightest in the industry coming to join us. And if you enjoy the show, there's a few ways you can support us. You can follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. We're also over on YouTube and subscribe to our newsletters. I have one on my LinkedIn. Let's Talk Supply Chain has one on their LinkedIn as well. We've got some really cool merch in our shop at letstalksupplychain.com. And of course, we've got our membership group. If you are looking for a community of like-minded professionals, head over to secretsocietyofsupplychain.com to find out more. Kimberly, thank you so much for joining me today, sharing your story, sharing your journey, being a little bit vulnerable with us so that we can all learn from each other and make an impact in this wonderful industry.
Thank you so much for your time, Sarah, and thank you for having me.